who she is. But Walter, just I'm because of that, I'm inquiring while we're waiting to begin in semi-official fashion the extent to which you find you're referencing what your body knows seems as though automatic.
It is automatic a lot of the time. I cannot say how much of the time because I do not keep tabs. But I also sometimes find myself focusing without having thought about going into a focusing session.
Uh-huh.
So it is habitual. And I had decided years ago to incorporate it into my habits because it worked so well for me. And I still find there are times when I need to be focusing and I'm not. So I want to make that clear as well. I came to it in my late 60s or middle 60s, and and old habits die hard to us old guys. So, but it is. You may remember, Kendon, when we were listening to um, Linda, was it Linda who was doing the presentation that brought up focusing first when we were over at the church?
Yes.
Yes, I was startled in part because I didn't even remember that I was doing it. I had been doing it habitually for so long at that point. That was about a year ago, a little over a year ago. The
No,
point that
just a
I'm
year
getting to
ago,
here,
November of last year.
yes. So the point that I'm trying to get to here is that we can incorporate it into our routines so that as soon as we feel something wanting our attention, we go right to it because we early on learned that every one of these is a gift. It's a gift waiting for us to unwrap it. And pretty much all we have to do to unwrap it is let it unwrap itself. That's what it wants us to do, is be present for it. I can preach for a long time. I need to stop now.
Well, I again, Michelle, I will look to you to help me know when we sort of formally move into presentation mode. But I'll mention that Ann Weiser Cornell mentions that she was practicing focusing in a focusing partnership for 17 years before she first tried it alone. Now, I think there's a certain zeitgeist quality to that. I do find, as I say, the people I know here in Santa Cruz find it a very natural, it's as though it's a very natural thing to do. And I think Santa Cruz may be more contemplative than average, and our crowd within Santa Cruz may be more contemplative than average, and who knows what the variables are. But Cornell began either late 50s or early 60s, I guess she began. And those of you who are old enough will, have some sense of how much you were, who I was and who we was back in those days. It may even have been when they were talking about the I generation. I don't know. But it's kind of, I wonder if it isn't evidence that the world has indeed evolved in a positive direction over the last 50 years in terms of who we are within ourselves and who we are within our social exchange. Anyway, I look forward to it becoming part of me too. It's sort of doing that.
There are several commentators, I don't even know how many, have mentioned for more than a century now, William James may have been one of the early ones, that every generation has its own generation specific sensibility that may not be significantly or terribly different from the previous generation or the subsequent generation, but every generation has its own spirit, is the way some writers put it. The point here is to connect with what you were saying, Kendon. Yes, we do change, we do evolve as human beings. That does not mean that we pay attention to everything we change as we go along. One of the challenges right now, in fact, it's a grand opportunity in the sciences, particularly the humanities and the social sciences, is to figure out this thing called epigenetics. Because epigenetics is that region where our new discoveries and habits become transformed over some time. And I don't know if anybody has any templates about what kind of time, but our new attentions, our new energies get directed towards new things that we want to think about, we want to be occupied with. These somehow influence the shaping of our gene pool. And there are significant numbers of people now in all the humanities and sciences working on what does this mean? There are a lot of implications here. How do we explore them?
So
I will, sorry, Michelle, you're going to make us go official. And just before you do that, I want to offer the possibility that some generation right about now, possibly ours, but possibly younger, might legitimately start identifying as the we generation. And for a while I was considering going with the they pronoun, but I'm now going with the we-I pronoun in that I was we before I was I. Maybe, I don't know, we, I, they. Anyway, okay, thank you, Michelle. Get us on track.
Okay, well I actually wanted to speak to the epigenetics question a little bit. So there are different explanations and mechanisms in play with what we know about epigenetics. A big part of what we have evidence for is, and I can never remember exactly how many syllables. It's either methylation or methylization. But anyway, this change essentially to the proteins around the DNA that happens such that physiological experiences in one generation of acquired characteristics can be transmitted to the next generation. So that's the definition of epigenetics that's used in biological circles, really looking at the ways that changes during the course of an individual's lifetime then show up in the next generation without DNA mutations themselves, without changing the actual DNA sequence at all. So that's the stricter definition of epigenetics. We're learning a lot about those mechanisms and how they work, and I've only barely dipped my toe into that literature, so I don't know very much about it. But that is showing us that there's a lot of stuff that, like from the intergenerational trauma questions, is transmitted from parents and grandparents without requiring mutations to the DNA, and that's sort of that level. The other thing that we've known in evolutionary biology for a very long time is that, of course, you co-inherit both the genes and the culture and environmental circumstances of parents and grandparents. So there is this interplay of genes, how they're expressed in a certain developmental environment, and things that are attributable to culture, to choices, that also get passed from generation to generation in a way that's very difficult to unravel. And so we can talk about all of that, including learned behavior stuff, as sort of a broader epigenetics question of things that can be, new in one generation, not affecting the DNA, but still being inherited in subsequent generations. So, sorry, just had to nerd out at you a little bit. I'll back off now.
Nope.
So Yeah, so one of the things that I want to do to take us into this
I'm on a
is, and
session where I'm the presenter, call in an hour or more.
I will get us into a little bit of our Nova Sutras space just by reminding us of the key Nova Sutras principles of Agaya and Ubuntu. And then talk a little bit about focusing practice and focusing partnership in relation to that. So very simply, what brings us together as a community in Nova Sutras are these concepts, Agaya and Ubuntu. Agaya is our recognition of all of the co-creative energy and beauty and wonder of the living world in particular as an expression of love. So by combining agape, this term for universal love, and Gaia, the scientific understanding of the way that life co-evolves and creates conditions for ever more complex life into this word Agaya. And then our other principle, which follows from a lot of understanding of Agaya, is Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a word coming from languages of Southern Africa that is about interdependence, interconnection, the way that humans in particular are extremely evolved for caring for and learning from one another. And that this is simply a fractal, a replication of patterns that we see all over in nature, where organisms of different species are interdependent on one another. There could not be any such thing as animals if there were not photosynthesizing plants and other organisms that can capture energy and convert it into sugars, foods that we then metabolize with the oxygen that they produce as a waste product. So working from Agaya and Ubuntu, the question of the relevance of something like focusing practice, in particular focusing partnership, for those of us who are also working for Agaya and Ubuntu, those of us who are very motivated to work to improve human life, improve life on Earth, protect the climate, protect the biosphere, protect biodiversity. What excites me about this practice is it provides a way to probably connect with certain facets of Agaya within ourselves. When you're feeling into your center, a lot of what you're feeling into is all of the information that your body collects and receives, because just like every other animal on the planet, you are constantly interacting with and getting information from your surroundings. This information that we get doesn't always come up into consciousness. A lot of it is held in different parts of the nervous system, interacts with the body in different ways, and focusing seems to be a way to tap into what it has recognized, what you know, but you don't know at the level of verbalizing consciousness. The thing that really most excites me about focusing partnerships is, as I said, humans are these incredibly social animals. We are deeply interdependent. We only function well in stable social networks. That's the only way that humans thrive. Focusing partnership, with its emphasis on deep listening and being listened to, seems to answer some very deep needs that humans have for that kind of connection. And it gives a chance not only for what Kendon talks about, for the internal knowledge that can't verbalize to be heard by your own verbal consciousness, but then also be heard by another human and possibly make connections, find routes to communicate more effectively between your nonverbal understanding or intuition and the nonverbal understanding and intuition of another person. And so I'm really excited about what we can learn about that, how we can develop that practice, and how we can use it to help build a more loving and intentional set of relationships and social networks, and that Nova Sutras can support that in growing a community together. So that's my spiel. Kendon, what have you got for us?
Well, let me begin with huzzah, which is how I ended a communication to Benny and Nancy this morning. I'm becoming increasingly conscious of wonder and awe in relation to the times I am living through with others, particularly here in Santa Cruz. And then I'm going to take you a bit on my personal journey in the last year since November 2019, which Walter and I were referencing, when I first heard of focusing and recognized that I was a professional psychotherapist for on the order of 60 years prior to learning about focusing. I had never heard of it. Even more confounding, it first surfaced at the University of Chicago in about 1957, and I was there on campus in 1957. I didn't know, but you know, we have regrets. So a year ago, in a group called Progressive Christian Forum, we had been going from the oldest downward on a monthly basis. They've been around for several years, but for the roughly year prior, one and then another of us reported on our spiritual autobiography. And it was interesting and edifying, and the ego enhancement was limited to that little crowd of ex-ministers and whatever. All of my generation, as I remember. And we were moving toward greater social activism, but November of last year, Linda Clark told us about her progression, and she emphasized the experience of focusing as central to it. And Michelle, well, I say Michelle, I'm confident that somewhere or other that was recorded on somebody's smartphone. I don't know about the quality of the recording, but I'll make a mental note to try to track that down. But anyway, somehow or other, I got interested, and then somewhere or other, sometime or other, Jennifer was looking into it, and I linked up with her and Linda after they had been spending some time reading a relatively recent book by Ann Weiser Cornell, Focusing in Clinical Practice, The Essence of Change, which was published in 2013. And I learned that somewhere in there, Jennifer had also tried to look into the institute founded by the man who founded Focusing, which was Eugene Gendlin, as I say, back in the 50s in Chicago. And she made an effort to learn about at least focusing partnerships through Kendon's Focusing Institute. And it's a huge resource of information for anyone who wants to learn about focusing. But I haven't interrelated with their interface well so far. It's still sort of out there in Spring Valley, New York, 20 miles from where I lived for decades. So getting back to Linda and Jennifer and I, we read this line by line, and I would say learned a lot about focusing. Wiser as a subtle thinker and a fluent. She writes very well. So I learned about focusing, but I want to emphasize, as today's presenter on focusing partnerships, I didn't thereby learn about focusing partnerships until, I'll say, 2 months ago. I don't remember. And then I have recommended to, so to speak, all of you in relation to this presentation, part of Kendon's book, Focusing, Chapter 11, is called The Focusing Manual, and he gives 4 frames of reference for focusing with others, the first of which is more or less focusing partnerships. And then, having published this in 1978, he came back in 2007 for a 25th anniversary reprint. And it troubles me that there was no revision with that, what amounted to a second edition, even though Cornell and others, but Cornell had written any number of other books. I will reference 2 more of her books in a minute. So it was as though he learned nothing in the intervening 25 years that he wanted to update us on in 2007. Although, in fairness to him, he wrote 3 other books on aspects of focusing and spent a large amount of his time working with others in focusing. So when he published this book in 1978, he'd been doing it with other people for 20 years. And his style in this book is declarative and authoritative and what I will call the canon. And here am I speaking to you about focusing partnerships, and I have yet to read this book cover to cover. I will. I'm struggling with priorities. I find Cornell easier to take in. I find David Rome, who I've referenced somewhere in relation to these Nova Sutras presentations, his books, Your Body Knows the Answer, is a meditator's version of focusing, a Buddhist version of focusing. I find it a delightful book. Leoma and I are doing that one line by line together. And I do indeed believe your body does know the answer. I'll give a couple of examples again in a minute. And to me, at the moment, it's as though Kendon was like Prometheus bringing his fire. It's that level of discovery of something central to us, very important, a knowing that's in our body that we can access and that can give us guidance and can settle our conflicts. Kendon says the body is the unconscious. So far as I know, the article or book describing the psychopathology of the body as unconscious has yet to be written, although I think it's fairly straightforward. much more so than Freud's. I'm a Freudian psychoanalyst historically. It's an amazing self-help system. But Cornell says 10% or so of us can learn it on our own. Linda is one of those 10%. She's had contacts with Cornell, as has had Jennifer, but she has developed her own personal focusing practice on her own. She hasn't entered into focusing partnerships. As I say, Cornell was only doing focusing for 17 years, somehow or other, before she tried it on her own. Now, what about focusing partnerships? So, in '78, 20 years of experience leading group after group after group locally, developing his psychotherapeutic skills with Carl Rogers at the clinic on the Chicago campus. Greatly impacting Carl Rogers' approach in Rogers' view and mine. But what he gives you in chapter 11 is a very active, to me, kind of partnership. So he would have you repeating back using only the words of the focuser, and I guess we all understand the focusing partnership classically is I'm the focuser, and for a half hour I'm tuning into the knowing within and putting it into words, and you are interacting with me around that in whatever way your partnership evolves. But Gentleman's advice is repeat back using only the focuser's words about 10% of the words you're hearing. This is over a period of typically a half hour. Now, 78, Cornell comes along in 96. I don't think this was the first book she wrote, but it's one that's sort of relevant. So she has a book, The Power of Focusing, A Practical Guide to Emotional Self-Healing. So it's a self-help book. And she has a chapter, she has 3 chapters, but particularly a chapter 9 called Focusing with a Friend. And then she sort of says, well, you start off this way, but as you get better at it, maybe you do this and maybe you do that. And I'll get back to that in a moment. And then another book in 2005. So we got like 10 years. Cornell has a book with relevant input on focusing. And this book, many of the chapters, they're little papers, 5-page papers. Many of the chapters of this are on the website that we alerted you to through Nova Sutras a month or so ago. Cornell has a website, Kendon has a website, David Rome has a website. And I've taken 5 or so pages from that book and given little quotes to them, which we sent out to you at about 11:15 today. The section called The Perils of Partnership. And so this is back in the previous decade, there's this little persuasive, okay, try this, and as you get more experience, try this. And then 10 years later, whenever it was originally published, but around that, she's talking about the perils of partnership, and I thought that was a good place to spend a little time in terms of reminding us that we're learning, and there's a learning curve, and the guy who's talking to you today is a novice. And so Betty, for example, has done some watching of the videos that are available on this subject and learning from what they offer. And I encourage any of you who are doing focusing partnerships to become students. And I hope that if we do these monthly town meetings, which we were mentioning briefly before we got formally going this morning, but we're anticipating a monthly, I'm calling it a town meeting, of people who are trying out focusing partnerships so we can learn from one another. Cornell would have you take a course with her. I don't think it's a terribly long one. I don't think it's a terribly expensive one, but she would be educating you in that course about focusing, about how to do focusing partnerships. So I'm encouraging you, in a manner of speaking, to jump in, but I'm cautioning you that there's a lot of useful things to learn, even though with the several people I know who are starting, just in the past month or two, we're just very impressed with how it works. And so I'll give you an example from last night. I've done now, I'll say less than 15, about 15 focusings. It has, I'm satisfied personally that when I was 2 or 3, I was registering my mother's emotional needs powerfully and sensitively without understanding. I felt what she needed, and there was a call to me to somehow meet her needs, which I think translated into a compulsion to help other people, even intrusively, during the remainder of my life up until the last few weeks, perhaps. Stay tuned. But in about a month ago, as it happened, I think it was with either Walter or Jennifer, who I've been doing focusing partnerships with, or it was in one of these demonstrations I've been doing, because last night it was a demonstration of sorts. But anyway, a month or so ago, I was being present to, as though this child gazing into its mother's eyes and needing to help her to feel the love she felt need for. And it's just coming to me, all right, you're aware of it, but that doesn't make it your responsibility. It's not your job. You don't have the skill set to do that. So never too late. And last night what happened was, having had that move off center stage, and the person talking to you here had 3 psychoanalyses, 3 different analysts, trying to get a good enough answer. I spent 24 years with one or another of them. And then I went into body-centered therapy, because if you're doing attachment level work, early, first 3-year work, the verbal psychotherapies don't cut it. And this partly tells us why, because there's very important learnings that are going on before we have words for anything, and then when we have very few words for anything. But we're learning, and we're coding our response patterns for a lifetime without a whole lot of verbal understanding. So naturally, when we come back to that learning with a richer capacity to understand, we can be useful to that body-mind in helping it to relax. And last night, what I was sharing was a kind of desperate hugging, and then a crying, successive stages, and then a crying, and then a spending a little time with the part of me that was reluctant to cry, and achieving a sense of acceptance that from my caretaker within, I'll call it in the moment, that it was okay. I was crying, that was okay. And last night I didn't feel a change, that was just a pattern I was recognizing. This morning I woke up and it was like it was settled business. It was like, a month ago when I said, "It's not your job, buddy. You're a kid." And it was like little me had someone who understood and was there, and it was okay if I cried. That was that's who I was in that moment, and they were there for me. And because I had years and years of whatever was going on that led to that, I anticipate that I will have other parallel relaxings in the months to come. But I don't know. I haven't done a replay yet on needing to help my mother feel loved, and that sure had a long history to lots of ground in dirt there. So I just don't know how much you can achieve in a single session. Again, granted, I've been working on myself, heavy duty work in a variety of frames for a long time. So, but I do have the sense with everyone else I'm interacting with that they're experiencing their version of what I'm experiencing. It's relevant to where their current frontier is, their current personal frontier. And one other thing I should add, you can either let what you want to have, you can either let what is going to surface, or you can ask a question and learn what the body has to say about the question you're asking. And so also last night, I came upon a behavior that indicated that that problem with boundaries that the intrusive need to help relates to. Was alive and well. Hopefully it's gotten better. And so I'm taking that back to focusing, and I'm going to ask focusing, okay, what's going on with your boundary problems? Why do you say things that really aren't yours to say yet, that it's somebody else's stuff? And I'll see what focusing has to say. But I had done this with my children just in the past weeks because my daughter, among ourselves, we were calling it helicopter parenting, but she's dealing with multiple stresses from several different directions, and I could cry, but that's my problem. She's handling them pretty well, and I can ask her, can I be of help, but she may not feel a need for help. That may be my need too. So current answers to heavy questions continue to show up for me. Now, before I go to the handout, let me just do a quick riff through the earlier. It's like Kendon wasn't worried about focusing partnerships, and then Cornell came along and sort of spelled out the successive evolutions that you can go through, and then later on came up with some warnings, and I'm going to use the warnings as a potential. I've talked more than I expected I was going to. Anyway. But so Cornell begins with, this is in the book, The Power of Focusing. This is chapter 9, Focusing with a Friend. She's talking about practical listening as her version of Kendon's repeating things back. And delightful book. I only looked at it starting at 11 o'clock this morning. I'm a novice. Haven't read it. Will read it one of these days. I hope one of you reads it sooner and tells us all more about it. But she says what to listen for, and these are just excerpts. Say back your partner's feelings and emotions. Tight, heavy, scared, mad, joyful. Say back what your partner is feeling or sensing right now, as opposed to what he felt yesterday or work. The example, focuser, I'm feeling tight across my chest, and it's the same place that was feeling so relaxed yesterday. Listener, you're feeling tight across your chest. And you can't go wrong. It's always most helpful just to say back the last thing he said. And she gives a paragraph. I'll pick up in the middle of the paragraph with a focuser. Oh, I see. It has to do with my friend Paula moving away. There's something in me that thinks I'll never find a friend as close as Paula. Listener, there's something in you that thinks you'll never find a friend as close as Paula. And then advanced listening, part of what you feel is, and that's tuning into, part of me sees this bottomless pit before me, and part of me is reluctant to move toward the bottomless pit. And so, as an advanced listener, I may say, whenever your partner says, I am or I feel, you're allowed to say back, part of you is or part of you feels. So the listener might say back, part of you feels reluctance. And then I would be supported in tuning into that. And that's very much like last night with the crier. There was reluctance to cry, and I was present to that part of me that was holding back. And I think I've said this before, but the partner is to the focuser as the focuser is to the body within. So I was being present as the focuser or the caretaker within to the reluctance within, and that led to comfort about crying as opposed to hesitation about crying. And then finally in that chapter, which I of course recommend to anyone, I don't remember what the book costs, it's not terribly expensive. Some of it, possibly that chapter, are on Cornell's website. I haven't looked. But finally she says, guiding, sometimes your partner's focusing process needs something more than listening. And I'll just read the first 4 of about 12 guiding phrases. Take some time to sense into your body. So in a recent focusing partnership, I said something like, where do you feel that in your body? The focuser was describing sort of spatially related experience rather than where it was here, and I was offering the possibility of tuning into the body element in that spatial sense. What wants your awareness now? How are you about that issue? The third one, take some time to say hello to that. And the fourth one, you might notice what's the best way to describe that. So she's saying not read them out one by one, but read the book over, maybe do a focusing partnership, and then pick up your book and flip to wherever you feel like you're currently learning and see if it offers some way you might have participated differently. Now, let me stop there. I plan to go on to, let me ask Michelle. Michelle, can we bring up the list of things I sent out? I plan to go on to Cornell's Perils of Partnership section for group discussion to the extent we're not, and I can read it aloud if we don't have it. I mean, her first rule, I'll just give you advance alert.
Would you like me to just do a screen share with that as well?
Say again?
I'm putting it into the chat. Would you prefer if I do a screen share with that, folks?
I lean to a screen share. I mean, at least flash it on the screen, and then let's see if we have discussion to go through before we move on to that. So you'll see there in bold in the middle, Rule 1 on page 135, out of page 133, 139, the reference being given at the top. Never, never, never mention the content of the focusing session either after the session is over, unless the focuser brings it up. So that's an example of the kind of thing we may come back to discuss. So again, and you all got that as a kind of email somehow or other, and it'll be in chat. And so questions, comments, whatever, discussion. Michelle, any comment or question?
Well, I think it might be.
Gee, that was fabulous.
Sorry, what? I wasn't.
Said, boy, Kendon, that was boring. Gee, Kendon, that was fabulous.
Oh.
Let's offer an alternative. You know.
All right. Well, thank you for helping. I think what I would like to know is what questions do you have, especially for those of you who are newish to focusing partnerships? And Jennifer, go ahead.
My apologies. I'm not in a spot where I can be seen right now. So can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
I have had less focusing sessions than Kendon, but I have been reading the Ann Weiser Cornell book regularly with an experienced focuser and Kendon. And I also have attended some lessons by Ann Weiser Cornell while I watched her walk 3 different people through their first focusing session and then have conversations about how that went and what happened, which was actually very helpful. My experience in practicing focusing is, for me, if I ask a question ahead of time, if there's something in particular I'm looking for, and then I practice focusing, it is amazing how clear my body lets me know what's working and what's not working. And so I'm actually finding it as a device for decision making to be immensely powerful. And I would even say inspiration. It sort of helps me connect at a body level about what really has flow and fascination for me. So I'm finding it frees me up energetically, and it's connecting me to inspiration. And each time I practice doing that, I feel like I am developing that interface where my conscious mind is paying attention to this other part of me that, and developing a kind of my very own sign language, my very own internal interface, because from what I understand, this isn't a verbal part of myself, that the subconscious isn't like that. It doesn't have the storytelling And what is the word I'm looking for? We're compulsive in our storytelling. We have to have our stories, but we will create stories for something, you know what I mean, if we don't know what's happening. That from what I understand, this when I'm focusing and I'm connecting to my body, there isn't really that need. And so that's really interesting. It's a different kind of communication, and I'm pleased to be developing the capacity and the internal language with my own self, and really grateful. And I do feel like I'm not, I never really promote anything that's like catharsis. I'm not saying catharsis can't happen, but that's not why I'm practicing this. I'm practicing this because I want to be a better listener. I want to be more in touch with my own body. I like the idea of knowing whether I have a body yes or a body no on something. I see it as a tool in my arsenal that will keep me healthy and well, but will also help me connect with others, which I'm deeply interested in because I think our culture has incredible divides. And I think the nuclear family and the suburban structure has created isolation and problems. And so I have hopes of joining groups similar to this one. This one is one of them where I get to connect to people in a new way. So I see focusing as a way to do that and a way to deeply connect with people and sidestep things that could be divisive, whether it's political issues or social issues or class issues. I'm not saying none of those things matter, but I do still think people need people no matter what. So thank you.
Thanks. Leoma, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Which of the Cornell books, which one is the most practical for helping to develop focusing partnerships, would you say, Kendon?
The one from the 90s, The Power of Focusing.
The Power of Focusing.
Probably the least expensive. I don't remember what I paid for it, but anyway.
Yeah, okay.
It's a gentle introduction.
Because I've been looking at Genlin's Focusing and David Rome's, but a couple of things you read from that sounded very, very useful.
This is Rome book.
And I will note that the power of somebody who can listen with heart and acceptance. I mean, I've not done much formal focusing. I'm looking forward to it. But as Kendon and I have been reading David Rome together, there have been times when we've dropped into it briefly, doing the focusing. And I remember one time in particular, which was fairly brief, but the power of Kendon's ability to be there for me in this non-judgmental, open way really opened something which I think is transformative. The next day, my body was trying to change, which it didn't quite succeed in because of physical disabilities. But it was moving from a primal anxiety, as Kendon named it in psychological terms, into curiosity. It was a very profound shift, which I feel like is there inside me permanently, not always accessible. So I'm quite interested in the transformative aspect of this, the guidance aspect of this. And I'm intrigued on how it might be used. Well, the focusing partnership has a privacy to it and sort of strict privacy rules, which is going to require some remembering of where I heard what. If I have friendships outside of the focusing partnership, did person A tell me about person A's mother's thing in a group setting in regard to something else, or was that just the focusing partnership? Oh, I can't say it if it's the focusing partnership. But if she broadcast it to the world in a context of discussing political changes, then I can. So that's going to be one of the perils of focusing partnerships if we're also trying to engage in other kinds of living into change together. But I'm intrigued as to how this practice could be used to, as Jennifer said, shortcut some of the scenarios and stories and adversarial stuff. So I think there's a great potential there in addition to the individual potential. And I'm very pleased and honored with Kendon's work and such, because it seems to me it's it connects with an inner landscape that goes in multiple directions. And I can, at some other point, I will undoubtedly say more about that, but not now.
And I'm confident that I have the envy of several in the group for having this inside track with Leoma, I've never mentioned to you, Leoma. I think others must have. You have the most incredible smile. It just, it's like the world is smiling at you. You are, and it's relevant to focusing partnerships because it's that when you're 2 years old, the specific words your mother may be murmuring to you are less important than, so to speak, the murmur and the facial expression and so on. You just learn so much in something called social referencing. The mother's expression tells you whether you're in danger or whether this is something you should feel good about. And you get it, baby. And Leoma's smile is like what one would wish for day after day after day. Growing up with your caretaker. So, and I mentioned that partly because of the value that others obviously experience, obvious in my view. People want relationships with you as much because of how you smile as for. You've got a very good mind. I don't mean not all your body, but anyway. So, in honor of focusing partnerships, I feel privileged, and that may be my stuff, but so be it. It's my stuff. Leoma.
Your response?
Oh, one more thing on what Leoma said. Her content. So Leoma mentioned a shift from sort of primal anxiety to curiosity. And Kendon writes a good deal about, he says things like, if you don't have the shift, you haven't focused. Yeah. And my own personal experience, I think Kendon we all come to this with who we are. And if, as I was saying to somebody, if you're a dancer, I wouldn't be if that's who you are fundamentally, that's where you live, I wouldn't be all surprised if while you were focusing, your body was moving somehow and manifesting what your body knew. And I think Kendon was writing after doing this for 20 years, so who knows what it was like for him year one and year two. But I don't remember, I don't typically feel a clear shift in the focusing session, and I don't typically feel it every focusing session, but I have had a fair number of times the morning after it gelled for me. So I think that's my version of the body shift. It settles down by the next morning, night's sleep or whatever. So again, we will all learn what it's like for us, but the kind of major, I would add surprising, awesome, wondrous personal experience that Jennifer and I were describing, I anticipate in what I'm calling our crowd, that will be the typical response we will see as people get back to us about how it's going for them. It's just what it is, you know. Wow. Leoma.
Well, now you've got me with two things to say. One was in direct response to that, if the Feldenkrais work, which is more strictly body-oriented, one of the things I'm looking forward to learning with the focusing is more openness to the emotional side. Well, different, but the Feldenkrais is more strictly body-oriented, although emotional things emerge. But if that rather profound neurological technique is any indication, that you don't always have a shift, but there's a quality of interest where the organism is interested. And then, as you say, shifts happen later, or else there can be kind of an accumulation where eventually enough different bits of information come around and then there's a shift. So that I think having the shift, immediate shift, should not be the indicator, the gold seal of approval. But I think there is something where the organism knows if it's important.
Yep.
And the other thing was, having just listened to this native elder whose name I cannot pronounce from up in the islands of Alaska, he had the fortune to grow up in a native society of about 500 people where he was never scolded and always greeted when he wandered into anybody's home as if he were the long lost person that they absolutely wanted to see at that moment. And I think what Kendon's referencing is this natural human hunger for acceptance. You know.
Well, it's a bit off topic, but my daughter is regularly participating with a Feldenkrais practitioner, and I've sat down with that woman because I had a session with her, and we were talking about all kinds of things, but her hands were on my body, more around, I think it was a, I don't know, hip or knee thing. Anyway. But I have described it since to others as her hands were talking to me in the language of trees. Sorry, let me turn that off. It was, my body was talking to her body. I can't, you know, I could feel that. I just didn't quite know what was going on. And we sat down together to talk about her body talking to my body, and the two of them gave me an example where Lori had been, I don't know, down about something, who knows. And Nancy put her hands on Lori's head, probably cupping her jaw with two hands, and moved the position of her head slightly. So perhaps instead of being here, it was here. And Lori's body fell into a posture that fit that realignment of the head that was, I'll call it, more joyous. Again, words are not what we are accustomed to using words to describe when you start talking about these body events. They sort of fit and sort of don't fit. But Lori's body responded to the cue of where that part of her body was in space to reorient the rest of her body in a way that had significant emotional consequences. Now, it approaches magic. Is that a fair statement, Leoma?
I would say that if the body shift is not accompanied by an inner shift, such as you've described with the focusing, then the old body pattern will resume. And the magic of the focusing is that it allows a more holistic shift, which I think also would need to be integrated with body shifts, or otherwise an habitual body pattern would hijack it, just like an habitual emotional pattern can hijack the body. This integration of the two, I think, is very promising.
Wonders to come. Walter.
To connect with what Leoma was just saying, my experience has been that the longer I go with focusing, just being with it, letting it be part of my daily life, the more I notice shifts happening. And they are almost always after the fact, so to speak. While I'm focusing, I can feel a shift, but compared to the shift that happens, like Ken was describing earlier, within the next 4 hours or so, the later shift is much more significant. And it happens, I think it happens while I'm asleep, but I'm not even sure about that because I don't know exactly when it happens or how it happens. I think it happens more as something like earthquakes. Earthquakes accumulate over time, and we don't feel the accumulation until the big thump happens after the tectonic plates got to a place where, okay, now we got to make a major course correction. And I think that happens in, I picture it like that as being what's happening in my own being. And I have relapses into my post-traumatic self, and I know that. But I find that over time, I have them much less and much less and much less. Focusing is very much cumulative. I also, I only had one focusing experience with Ann Weiser Cornell, and she was conducting a class at the time. And she would come in and be a focusing partner with her. So I would do the focusing. And I found that to be more unsettling than settling. And I think it was because it was a classroom setting. I'm not sure, but I felt her to be somewhat over responding to me in a way that felt intrusive to me rather than relaxing to me. And my experience with focusing has been the more, when I'm doing it with a partner, the more my partner talks, the more I'm trying to figure out what my partner's talking about than I am focusing on what I need to be focusing on. So my role as a partner tends to be very light-handed, very, I think less talking is more. I guess I'm trying to suggest that we need to trust the focusing to teach us where we need to go with it. Because every one of us is going to go to our place where we need to go. My place is different from yours, and everyone else's is unique. Every one of us is a unique social creature. And we need to honor that.
My experience in Santa Cruz with this has a certain parallel to my sense of my experience with my mother's need for love when I was quite little. I think our awareness of the listeners listening is highly sensitive. And it's the quality of our sense of that that gives the power to the listening. And if you feel that attunement between the two of you, I think it would be natural enough if the words fell away and you simply spoke into that caring listening that hears as you were focusing. And of course, we'll all experience, one or another gradations and variations of that.
So we've only got about 10 minutes left. I'll have to close this out a couple minutes early because I have a 1 o'clock appointment. And I want to check in with Benny because I had muted your phone for some noise. You're still muted, so if you want to unmute and let us know if you have any questions or anything you want to drop in. Benny?
Benny may have gone.
Okay. And again now, Carol, we're not seeing you. Looks like your mic is open. So if you had any questions or comments.
I'm afraid somewhere in there I fell asleep.
Oh.
And I didn't want to admit that, but I think I need to.
Okay.
Fill in why I'm
comfortable with that.
Pardon me? I just, I don't know, I had a stressful day on Sunday and I slept a lot last night, but I wasn't through, I guess.
Yeah. Well, part of listening to your body is listening to when it wants to rest. So.
But I found this very interesting.
Great. Yeah, and again, we're recording this. I'll send the link out to everybody at the end as well. Jennifer, did you have any parting comments, questions?
I am open to the catharsis idea of having big emotional shifts. I'm very open to that being a part of my focusing. I do have some sense of that, both in sessions, actually even in reading the books. There's something, because I've been reading the books in partnership with other people and just reading the words out loud and talking about it. It is I don't know how else to describe it. It's a different way of thinking about my body and my emotions and how to be present for both I've never seen anything quite like it anywhere else. It does a lot of things in my brain. So I think I'm with Walter on this one, that there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes, deep work. But I have to say my favorite and happiest moments where I definitely get the sigh, I get the shift, is when I go in with a question and I'm specific. I'm like, I'm wondering what's going to happen with this. And I find I'm working something through. There's something trying to happen there. And I usually within a 10-minute session, I get some clarity. I get clarity one way or the other. And to me, in 10 minutes, I've struggled with stuff for days or weeks or months with no clarity at all. And here I can do something for 10 minutes and really feel kind of like, wow, like what do they call it? Gendlin called it life forward movement. That's what the emotions are there for. They're moving you forward into the next present moment that's alive. And that's what I want. I want to be fully alive as I can be. And I do feel like it is helping me with that. So really enjoying these conversations, and sorry I couldn't get my image on until now. Good to see you all.
So, Leoma.
I look forward to it. I struggle a lot with doing I've been trying to do focusing on my own and I've not gotten very far with it because of various issues. But looking forward to it, and I'm also, as I said, looking forward to exploring the group possibilities, because I think of things like having a session where we're downloading or uploading a bunch of information, a presentation of intellectuals such as Nancy or Paul, or I mean somebody's, and then if we then had a focusing connection to it, how all the intellectual complexity that we might need to think about an issue could settle into the body and we could become aware of it, aware of the connections without having to leap into stories of confrontation or opinion. So I'm just intrigued by the ongoing exploration of this on the group level as well as the individual level.
May I make a couple of brief comments? It's Walter. Maybe I've been blocked.
No, I'm hearing you.
I wanted to respond to Leoma briefly. One question, Leoma, do you have the little brief 6-item list for steps into a focusing session when you're doing it for yourself?
I have that. A lot of my challenge right now is physical spasticity and how that interferes with the body signals.
Oh, okay. I hear you.
I mean, there's some individual things to be worked through. But yes, I do have that marvelous little 6-step thing, and I also have Rome's book, which are both very useful.
Okay, good. The other thing that I wanted to say is that with practice, it becomes habituated. We become habituated. We find our way of getting into that space. I was talking about this with a friend about a couple of years ago, who was a very seriously devoted Zen Buddhist meditator. And he wanted to know about focusing as part of our conversation. It came up. And he wanted to know about focusing. And as I was describing it to him, he says, "Oh, well, that's what I do when I go into a meditation. It takes me about 15 seconds. He was saying that these 6 steps take him about 15 seconds, and he's into a Zen meditation moment where he doesn't want to come back until he feels hunger, because he's so relaxes when he's in that place."
Mm-hmm.
And this fellow was a carpenter. He still is a carpenter. I've communicated with him recently, and he loves the Zen meditation and does it so well that for him, this would be stepping backwards, as it were. He doesn't have to. He resolves family issues through his meditation and so on. That's just a way of saying that it encouraged me to go deeper into meditation, and I have, and I like that as well. And I often wake up in the wee hours and I just stay in bed and meditate, and it works well until I need to get up and get a glass of water. That's all.
I would like to chime in. Recently, I got a partner on Zoom, and we're going through a meditation class, one that's used to train people for when they're in cohorts in studies, so that they have the most uniform meditative mindfulness result as possible. They all get the same training, and it's a free class available online through Unified Mindfulness. But I was doing that together with them, and one of a central focus is, clarifying your sensory experience. And I was just thinking how much that relates when Walter was talking about how our mindfulness practice and our focusing, the ways they kind of dovetail And because the sensory, sorry, that's my dog in the background, the sensory feeling, like, are you feeling an emotion? Are you feeling a portion of your body? You know what I mean? Are you paying attention to sounds outside? Are you paying attention to your own internal voice? So sometimes just getting some sensory clarity is part of the mindfulness process that helps me when I'm doing my focusing. And so long time meditator here, but totally happy to be doing a refresher course and wanting to be, I don't know how to explain that, more steady. So I can have those serendipitous dovetails more and more. But anyone wanted to know, the little words that I gave you for the class, it's really quite good. And it's pretty free from any, it's purposely done so it can be used uniformly for anyone from any background, but yet is very powerful. So anyway, I just want to do a heads up for that mindfulness practice does work well.
Now, Michelle has to close us down.
I do.
Jennifer, and I will try to get some of the things I referenced photoed and to her and to you guys. We'll see if I'm successful, and she will get back to us about the town meeting thing.
Yeah, so that's happening next week at this time. So it'll be the third Tuesday of every month. We'll town meeting. I kind of like that. Yeah, not quite sure what to call it. Haven't put it on the events page yet, but it's definitely scheduled for this time next week. And then
I'm sorry, what time, Michelle?
This starting at 11:30, so the same time block, 11:30 to 1.
Okay, I will be ducking out at 12:30 because I have a long-standing group meeting on the third Tuesday.
Oh, nuts. Okay, I thought that was the one that really worked for everybody.
I probably didn't raise it.
Okay.
So my apologies. Anyway, you got to close down.
Okay,
we'll work it out.
Maybe we'll reconsider and work it out later. Sorry about that. And I really do need to close down. So thank you all for coming, and be well, and we'll talk to you soon.